The kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and something I couldn't name yet. The particular staleness of a house where something has already gone wrong, even before you know what it is. I was standing at the counter at 6:40 in the morning, still in yesterday's socks, pouring the second pot because the first one sat too long. My husband had left 4 days ago. Vancouver to Toronto, he said. A systems audit for his firm. He packed a single carry-on, kissed me on the cheek the way you kiss a doorknob, and rolled his suitcase down the front path without looking back. I remember watching him from the window. Not because I was suspicious. Just because that's what you do when someone leaves your house. You watch until they disappear. We'd been married 6 years. I was 31. We had a daughter named Poppy, who was 5 and believed deeply in the existence of dragons. And a son named Theo, who was 8 and had recently decided that everything in the universe could be explained by physics. We had a house in Burnaby with a mountain ash in the backyard that turned red every October. We had joint checking, a shared line of credit, and a mortgage we refinanced 2 years ago when rates were still decent. We had, I believed, a life. My best friend called me that Thursday afternoon. She and I had been close since our second year at UBC. The kind of close where she still had a key to my house, and I still knew the name of every person who'd ever broken her heart. She asked how I was doing. I said fine. She asked again, differently. I put down my coffee. She told me she'd seen my husband 3 weeks ago in Calgary, not Toronto. Calgary. He'd been at a restaurant near the Bow River with a woman she didn't recognize. They were not eating like colleagues. She'd hesitated to say anything because she thought maybe it was nothing, maybe a work dinner, maybe she was wrong. But she'd seen them again the following weekend. Same city, different restaurant. And the woman, both times, had been visibly, unmistakably pregnant. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything for a long time. I just stood in my kitchen and looked at the mountain ash through the back window and thought about how my husband had packed a single carry-on for a week-long trip. I said, "Okay, thank you for telling me." I hung up and I sat down on the kitchen floor, not dramatically. There was just nowhere else to go. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes. Poppy was at school. Theo was at school. The house was completely quiet except for the refrigerator and the sound of the neighbor's dog barking at something in the alley. I thought about whether I was going to fall apart. I waited for it. It didn't come, not the way I expected. What came instead was something colder. Something that felt, strangely, like clarity. I got up off the floor. I opened my laptop. I hired a private investigator the next morning. I found him through a family law firm that had been recommended to me by a colleague 2 years ago, for reasons I'd filed away without quite knowing why. He was professional, unhurried, and told me he would need 2 to 3 weeks and a daily rate I won't specify here, except to say it was money I had in my personal savings account. Money my husband did not know the exact balance of. That had been a habit of mine since before we married, actually. Keep something for yourself. My mother told me that. I'd never thought it would matter. While I waited, I went through the last 18 months of our joint account statements. Not frantically, carefully, the way you read a document you already know contains bad news. I was looking for patterns. I found them. Recurring e-transfers to an account I didn't recognize, $300 here, $500 there. Once in November, $1,800 marked simply as miss. There were hotel charges in Calgary dated to weekends when I'd been told he was at a conference in Edmonton. A charge at a baby boutique on 17th Avenue, Stouffville, U, that I recognized because I'd walked past it once during a layover. The receipt amount was $246. I didn't confront him. I went to work. I made lunches. I helped Theo with the project on the solar system and let Poppy sleep in our bed on Friday night because she said she'd had a bad dream. I acted like a woman who had no idea her life was structured on a fault line. My husband called from Toronto every evening at 8:30. He sounded tired, slightly irritable, completely ordinary. I asked about the audit. He complained about the hotel Wi-Fi. I told him the kids missed him. He said he'd be home Sunday. He came home Sunday. He walked through the door and hugged the kids and put his carry-on in the front closet and said he was starving. Had I eaten, should he order Thai? I said sure. We ate Patsy E at the kitchen table, and the kids told him everything that had happened in a week. And he listened and nodded, and I watched his face and thought, "You are a very good actor, and I have wasted a great deal of time." The PI sent his report on a Tuesday. I read it in my car in the parking garage of the building where I worked as an environmental consultant, at 7:15 in the morning before anyone else arrived. My husband had not been in Toronto. He had been in Calgary in a 2-bedroom apartment in Kensington that was leased under his name. He had been there with a woman. The PI included photographs. Who was approximately 8 months pregnant. They had attended 2 prenatal appointments at a private obstetrics clinic in the northwest of the city. My husband had been listed on the intake form as the partner. There was also a second document attached. The PI had, in the course of his work, discovered that my husband had opened a personal line of credit against our home equity, not our joint line, a separate one, 18 months ago. The draws totaled just over $60,000. I sat in that car for a long time. Then I forwarded everything to the lawyer. I had called her the morning after my best friend phoned me. She was a family law lawyer based in Vancouver, someone I'd found through a referral network after a colleague went through a difficult divorce 2 years prior. When we met, she was precise and unhurried, and she had a way of listening that made you feel like every word you said was being cataloged somewhere useful. I had liked her immediately. When she reviewed the PI report and the financial records I brought her, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "All right, here's what we're going to do." She explained the situation clearly. In British Columbia, the Family Law Act governs property division, and family property, which includes our home, our joint accounts, and certain other assets accumulated during the marriage, is generally divided equally. However, the $60,000 drawn against our home equity was a different matter. Drawing against jointly held equity, without the other spouse's knowledge or consent, particularly when used to fund a separate household, constitutes a significant breach of the duty of good faith that both spouses owe each other during the relationship. It wasn't a technicality, it was a basis for claiming an unequal division. She also told me that I should not, under any circumstances, confront my husband or tell him what I knew. Not yet. I asked her why. She said, "Because right now, he doesn't know that you know. That is an advantage. Don't give it away." Over the next 2 weeks, she moved methodically. We documented everything. She had me gather every financial record I could access, tax returns for the last 5 years, RRSP and TFSA statements, his pension plan from work, the records related to the home equity line. I gathered them quietly, at night while my husband slept or watched TV downstairs. I photographed documents. I emailed statements to myself. I did it without shaking. My lawyer filed a preservation order to freeze certain assets before anything was disclosed. She also contacted the bank regarding the unauthorized line of credit. She told me that under the Family Law Act, I would likely be entitled to be reimbursed for half of those unauthorized draws as part of the property division, meaning the money he had taken would effectively be counted against his share. She also helped me understand something I hadn't known. Because we had a child together, and now, the reality of another child coming, she advised me to get clarity about what shared parenting might look like and to begin establishing a record of my involvement with Poppy and Theo that was thorough and consistent. I made notes at every school pickup. I documented medical appointments. I attended Theo's science fair and sat in the 3rd row with the program in my hands and took a photograph of him standing beside his model of the Kuiper belt. And I thought, whatever happens, I am going to be the one who shows up. I told my husband on a Saturday morning in March. The kids were at my mother-in-law's, a fact I had engineered, not out of cruelty, but because I did not want my children to hear what was about to happen in their kitchen. He was drinking coffee. He had his reading glasses on. He was looking at something on his phone, half smiling at it, and I remember that particular detail very clearly. The half smile, the reading glasses, the complete absence of anticipation. I set a folder on the table in front of him. I said, "I know about the permit in Calgary. I know about the prenatal appointments. I know about the $60,000. He didn't say anything. The half smile fell off his face the way something falls off a shelf, suddenly, completely, without recovery. I said, "My lawyer has already been engaged for 2 weeks. The preservation order is in place. The bank has been notified about the home equity line. I'm not here to fight with you. I'm here to tell you that this process has already started, and the way it goes from here depends on what you do next." He said very quietly, "How long have you known?" I said, "Long enough." He tried, in the weeks that followed, several things. He tried remorse. He sat at that same kitchen table 3 days later and told me he was sorry, that it had been a mistake, that he loved our family, that we could fix it. I listened. I told him I appreciated that he said that and that it didn't change anything. He tried to argue about the equity line. He said it wasn't what it looked like, that he'd intended to pay it back, that the money was an investment. His lawyer, a man from a firm downtown, sent a letter suggesting that the draws were permissible under the terms of the home equity agreement. My lawyer sent a letter back that was, from what I could tell reading it at my kitchen table, approximately 17 pages long and absolutely immovable. He tried once to suggest that the children would be better served by remaining primarily in his care, that I worked long hours, that stability mattered. I looked at him when he said this. I looked at him for a long time. Then I opened my phone and showed him the documentation my lawyer had assembled. 6 months of school pickups, medical records, teacher emails, the photograph of Theo at his science fair, the reading logs I kept for Poppy, the swim lesson schedules, the dentist appointments, every single thing that constitutes the actual daily architecture of raising children. He didn't bring it up again. There is a provision under the BC Family Law Act called equal division of family property. It allows a court to divide property in a way that departs from the default 50-50 split when an equal division would be significantly unfair. The money drawn from the equity line, used to establish a separate household and fund his other relationship over 18 months, formed the basis of our claim for unequal division. My lawyer was confident. She had done this before. The settlement was reached without going to trial. I don't want to state specific dollar amounts, because this is not about the money in the way people sometimes assume it is when they hear the word settlement. But I will say that the result was fair in a way that I did not initially believe it would be, fair in the mathematical sense, and also fair in the moral sense, which I had not been sure were the same thing until they turned out to be. I kept the house. That was the part that mattered most. Not because of what it was worth, but because of the mountain ash in the backyard. And because Poppy had grown 2 inches since we measured her against the kitchen door frame in May, and because Theo had a poster of the James Webb Space Telescope taped above his desk, and because this was the house where my children knew where everything was. My husband, my ex-husband, moved to Calgary shortly after the settlement was finalized. He has the children on alternating school holidays and a portion of the summer. The children know he has moved. Theo asked me once, very directly, the way he asks everything, whether I had known for a long time before I told anyone. I said yes. He thought about this. He said that must have been hard. He is 8 years old. He said it with the particular gravity of a person who already understands that some knowledge is a weight you carry alone, and then he went back to reading about dark matter. Poppy asked me if Daddy still loved us. I told her yes, of course he did, in his way, and that loving your children and failing them are not mutually exclusive. Though I did not use those words with the 5-year-old. I told her that her dad loved her very much, and that some things between grown-ups are complicated, and that none of it was anything she did or anything she needed to fix. She accepted this with the pragmatism of a child who has dragons to think about. My best friend came over the weekend after the settlement was signed. She brought a bottle of BC Pinot Noir from a Naramata vineyard we'd driven through together in our 20s, before either of us had mortgages or children or the specific knowledge of what betrayal actually feels like in your body. We sat on the back deck and watched the mountain ash in the dark and didn't say very much. At some point she said, "I keep thinking I should have told you sooner." I said, "You told me when you were ready. That was enough." She asked if I was okay. I thought about it honestly, which I had been trying to do more of. I said, "I think I'm going to be." The house creaked around us the way houses do at night, settling into itself. Inside, Theo and Poppy were asleep. The equity line had been resolved. The accounts had been separated, the preservation order had been lifted, and the mortgage was in my name alone, refinanced at a rate that I could manage on my income, if I was careful, and I am careful. I had spent the better part of a year carrying something I couldn't set down, and what I know now, sitting on the other side of it, is that the hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. Though that was hard in ways I'll spend years fully understanding. The hardest part was the weeks when I knew and he didn't know. I knew. And I still had to sit across from him at the dinner table and pass the rice and ask about his day, and not let a single thing show on my face. I was good at it. I didn't know I would be. Theo came down once during that period for a glass of water and found me at the kitchen table at 11 at night with folders spread out around me, my reading glasses on, taking notes. He stood in the doorway in his dinosaur pajamas. He still wore dinosaur pajamas at 8, fiercely, against all social pressure, and looked at me. He said, "Are you working on something important?" I said, "Yes." He nodded, like that was the right answer, poured his water, and went back upstairs without asking another question. He trusted, without needing to be told, that what I was doing mattered. He was right. And that, in the end, was what got me through. Not the lawyer. Not the settlement. Not even the clarity I'd felt sitting on that kitchen floor the first morning. It was the knowledge that my children were watching, even when I thought they weren't, that the shape of the life I built from that point forward would be the first map they ever had for what it looks like when someone refuses to be diminished. I did not want to be diminished. So I wasn't. There's a version of this story where I fell apart, where I sat on that kitchen floor and stayed there. I used to think that was the more honest version, that grief that size should flatten you, that anything less meant you hadn't loved enough, or lost enough, or felt enough. I know now that's not true. What I felt in that parking garage, reading that PI report on my phone at 7 in the morning, was not numbness. It was something more like the specific weight of understanding a thing you cannot ununderstand. You don't fall apart from that. You get very quiet. And then you start making decisions. What strikes me now, looking back, is how much of what saved me was built long before any of this happened. The savings account he didn't know the balance of. The habit of keeping receipts. The lawyer's number I'd filed away 2 years earlier for no reason I could name. None of that was luck. It was a quiet kind of integrity, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that just runs underneath everything you do. The belief that you were worth protecting even in a life that seems to be going fine. I had treated my own financial clarity as a moral responsibility, not a precaution against a specific disaster. And when the disaster came, that foundation held. That matters. I think about Poppy and Theo when I think about this, about what they are absorbing from watching me navigate the year we've just come through. Theo asked me once if I had known for a long time before I told anyone. I said yes. He said, that must have been hard. 8 years old. He wasn't asking whether I had been sad. He was recognizing the particular difficulty of carrying knowledge responsibly, of not acting on emotion before you'd acted on information. I don't know how he understood that so clearly. Maybe children understand more than we give them credit for. Or maybe he was just watching me, the way children watch their parents, cataloging everything. I didn't want my children to see a woman who had been destroyed. I also didn't want them to see a woman who pretended nothing had happened. What I wanted, and what I hoped they saw, was someone who looked at a hard thing clearly, thought it through carefully, and then did what needed to be done, not without fear, not without grief, but without losing herself in either one. The $60,000 my husband drew against our shared equity and spent building another life, that money had a consequence, not because of fate or any force outside the law, but because actions accumulate. Every transfer, every lie, every weekend in Edmonton. They created a record. And that record, in the end, spoke louder than anything he said sitting across from me at the kitchen table trying to explain what it looked like. I kept the house. The mountain ash in the backyard turned red again this October, the same as every year. Poppy measured herself against the kitchen doorframe last week, and she's grown another 1.5 inches. Theo has a new poster above his desk now, the pillars of creation from the Webb telescope, all that gas and dust collapsing into new stars. I look at it sometimes when I walk past his room at night. All that pressure, all that time. And then, something new.